Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Bolt with your host, Dr. Jeff Tilley. Today's topic: teenagers are not subject matter experts, no matter what they think. Plus, the new WMO climate report. Sit back and relax and enjoy today's podcast. So, it's been a couple weeks since the last podcast. I apologize for that. It's been something of a busy period, plus I was pretty sick the last week and didn't have much voice. So I am back to you this week with a series of podcasts that are tackling the latest hysteria over climate warming, climate change, climate protests. It's all over the map. And today I'm just going to dive in and say something which probably some of you might not like, but it's true. And the title basically gives it away. Teenagers are not subject matter experts, no matter what they think. And even if these teenagers are the most brilliant teenagers on the planet and have been to Harvard and gone to graduate school already by the age of 16 or 17, they're not the only subject matter experts out there. And yet, Congress is doing a big disservice to science and to the entire controversy by entertaining the notion that these teenagers are worth having at congressional hearings. And if you look at the pictures of those hearings, you don't see any scientists there. You see mothers, you see little kids. What the hell is Congress doing with all this? Why is this worthy when they've already heard the science testimony from the actual experts? What do these teenagers know that nobody else knows? The answer is nothing. Just like AOC knows no more than the experts. Seriously. What news is there to be had, except that it's just a publicity stunt and to try and gain sympathy? Oh, the children are so upset about climate change and blah, 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 blah. Well, the fact is, as I have reported on numerous podcasts, not everybody is in agreement that we have a total catastrophe facing us if we don't react in the next 90 seconds or so. In fact, there's still uncertainties in the climate system that we don't understand very well. I've detailed some of the new information on previous podcasts that's come in that basically means there's uncertainty, folks. We still don't know really the answer. We certainly can say that we are in a warming climate based on what we have from the period of record. The period of record is a very small time in Earth's history. And it brings to mind other multiple questions, which I will tackle in subsequent podcasts this week. Regardless, if Congress is going to have hearings on climate change, why are you even making time for 16, 17-year-old activists that have done nothing but have looked at various websites, some of which may not be scientifically valid, some of which may be biased, and just looked at pictures without understanding really any of the science that goes into it? Have these two girls and the others that they had, I don't know how many they had, I know they had at least two that were featured in a recent article. How much do they understand the physics? How much do they understand the thermodynamics? Do they even understand what thermodynamics is in terms of the Earth climate system? Do they understand how cloud processes work? Do they understand the uncertainties in aerosols? Do they know the first thing about how a numerical model works and the fact that there are uncertainties and errors and that you have errors in your initial conditions for your models, they propagate, and they can create unpredictable results. Do they know any of that? No. They haven't been to college. All they've done is they've looked on the internet, which brings up a point that other people have raised. Everybody thinks that they're an expert on a subject because they read a page about it on the internet. Then they haven't had the education, they haven't had the training, they haven't had the experience. But no, lo and behold, they're an expert. I call bullshit on that. Sorry. there's so much of this hysteria that is being fueled by people who don't know what they're talking about. And I'm going to say shame on the science community for not getting out in front of this and instead allowing people who have no credibility as scientists to speak for them and to potentially misrepresent the results, to misrepresent the perspective, and cause even more hysteria, which just is getting a little out of hand and a little ridiculous. So let's take a look at some of the things that have come out. The World Meteorological Organization just recently put out its State of the Global Climate in 2018 report. Now, I have not read the whole report either, and I will be reading it as the week goes on and digging into some of the details. What they have on their website, and no doubt this is what our activists are looking at, are a series of pretty pictures that have sound bites, stories, instead of really in-depth, detailed analysis in many respects. Though there are some interesting things that can be realized from the pretty pictures even. Yes, 2018 was the fourth warmest year on record from a global perspective, but it was not as warm as any of the last 3 years. So we have, and in fact, there has been a downward trend since 2015. So what does that mean? Does that mean we are still warming? Yes, we probably are on a longer term, but we are cooling on a short term. How long is this oscillation going to be? We don't know. There's more to be said. Greenhouse gas concentrations, CO2 concentrations as measured at various clean sites, yes, are increasing. That is not a surprise. Even if you were to have, as some would propose, the U.S. become carbon neutral by 2030, you're going to still have a rise in CO2. You're going to have many other nations, especially China, which is the world's top polluter by far, much more than the U.S., about 3 times as much, still cause CO2 levels to rise for a while. Mean global sea level rose once again a few millimeters. Few millimeters isn't a lot. Have not had quite a tenth of a meter of rise in sea level since 1993. Tenth of a meter is about 3 inches. That's not a lot for most places. If you're in the Maldives, as we've talked about in a previous podcast, yes, that's an issue. More of the ocean heat content has been rising. That is not a surprise either. That signal should be starting to register a little more substantially compared to the atmospheric rise, because the ocean heat content will naturally rise more slowly because it takes more energy to heat the same volume of ocean water than it does the atmosphere. Ocean acidification. Where's the little graph coming up? I'm looking at the site as I'm talking to you. The oceans are getting slightly more acidic. They are not acidic yet in terms of ocean pH. The pH is hovering a bit over 8, which is still relatively neutral, but there has been a clear trend of decreasing pH since about 1988. It's gone down perhaps 0.8%, perhaps. Actually, it's even less than that if you're looking at it properly. Maybe about 0.5%. That's not insignificant, but it's not enough to get too alarming. However, certain ocean corals are extremely sensitive to ocean pH, and we have noticed some adverse impacts to coral reefs over the last couple of decades. But in most cases, those can be primarily attributed to water pollution from neighboring countries. Australia being probably the biggest example of that with the Great Barrier Reef, and only recently in the last few years has taken steps to dramatically change its handling of wastewater that was being put out into the ocean between its coastline and the Great Barrier Reef itself. Arctic sea ice extent was well below average. It's been well below average for about a decade and a half. And we saw a little bit more of a drop in the last couple of years. It's approximately 7% below the average since 1981, a 30-year average, 1981 to 2010. As we've talked about before, climate averages often work on about a 30-year timescale, although they can be done larger. Antarctic sea ice extent was also well below average, so both in the Arctic and the Antarctic, both, although it is not as low as it had been several years ago. Glaciers continue to retreat. This is another long-term process that has been going on for decades, and even if you were to stop CO2 cold from all sources, it would still happen for probably a while. When you look at temperature anomaly trends around the world, over the U.S., Northern Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Siberia especially, you see warmer than normal conditions for 2018. Cooler than normal conditions for much of Canada, however, and for several parts of Central Asia, even parts of Antarctica and Greenland and over the Atlantic Basin. So the question remains, even though these figures can certainly be interpreted as saying, yes, we are still in a warming climate scenario. Does that really give us confidence that there's going to be a catastrophe if we don't, as the teenage activists said in their hearings earlier, that, we have to get something into place in the next 18 months or we're all doomed? That's preposterous. That's totally preposterous. These trends are still small. They are still a significant trend, nonetheless. They do indicate a warming climate. They do not necessarily entirely indicate that all of it is due to anthropogenic causes, since there are other natural sources of climate change, and they also do not indicate an immediate disaster, or a disaster probably even in the next 12 years. It's a longer-term process. And as we will talk about in other podcasts this week, what about the good aspects of climate change? Guess what? There are some. I'm going to leave you with that thought. For the Daily Bolt, I'm Dr. Jeff Tilley. Good night, good afternoon, good morning, and God bless.